Hi, everybody. It's Lisa Colon DeLay, and I'm going to be bringing you the Seven Deadly Sins, a series about the seven deadly sins. As some of you may know, I have a book coming out called The Way of the Desert Elders, and it was the Desert Elders who first wrote up about the seven deadly sins, but it wasn't seven and it wasn't deadly sins. It was actually nine things, and they were thought of more as temptations, afflicting thoughts and temptations, even demons. And so I want to get into that a little bit in a series to help us understand that more and to prepare us for the book that's coming up. You can get this book as a pre-order at tiny.cc/elders. And I hope you do that. I hope you read about the desert elders and all these afflicting thoughts. We all struggle with them. There's something we all are tempted by, and falling into sinning or harmful habits and harmful lifestyles is something that can happen when we give in to the temptations, not just when we have the temptations themselves. So the first chapter in the book is called Anthony and the Beasts, Gluttony to Temperance. And it talks about Saint Anthony, the desert hermit, who is often considered the father of monks. And he had trouble with gluttony because he came from a wealthy background where he could eat whatever he wanted. And then he went out into the desert and he did a lot of fasting, and he had an extremely simple menu. So the desert elders believe that gluttony or overindulgence in food and drink is something that weakens us, and it makes us more vulnerable to other sins and temptations to harm ourselves and to harm others. And it was a self-centered way to live, and often a gateway to other vices. We can think of it the same way now. Gluttony is overindulgence, and it can lead to other problems and other self-centered ways of living. So they saw a connection between a full stomach and the lack of spiritual maturity. They would actually intentionally not eat to satiation. They would eat a little less than to be completely full, because they wanted to be reminded that food wasn't the boss. God is the boss, and devotion to God was what mattered most, not satisfying the stomach. These ascetics, these desert elders, the men and women who went out to the Egyptian deserts and other places in the 300s to the 600s, really were redoubling their devotion. They were tired of living as they had been living, and they wanted to live a life that was entirely pure. Doesn't mean that they did that 100% of the time, but that's what they were striving for. And although we're not going to find ourselves going out to the desert anytime soon to live the same kind of way, we can get a lot of inspiration from them, a lot of strength from these people who've walked before us. So the desert father Evagrius, one of my absolute favorites, he wrote about these seven deadly sins as demons, and he called them vices, the eight afflicting thoughts, and later he added envy as part of them to make it nine. So in truth, we all fall into the temptation of gluttony sometimes. We might want to go for those salty or sugary snacks. We don't have to make sure, we can make sure that doesn't master us. And we might be going to food and overindulgence to satisfy some wound or some emptiness within us. We might do it to self-soothe, and it's just an extremely common thing to do. For me, I might be watching a basketball game and I want my big bowl of snacks, and it's not a bad thing to snack. The bad thing is to pig out, and we know it's not good for us.
Oh, yeah.
The next afflicting thought I want to talk about is lust. Lust is something that is also a temptation many of us struggle with, and we're inundated with all sorts of things that create lustful thoughts or thoughts of fornication. And so we need to think, what is that? Let's educate ourselves to know what we're talking about when we talk about lust. Lust involves an intense desire to do what we know is wrong, inappropriate, or indecent. That's a quote directly from The Way of the Desert Elders that I published. And I think it's an important thing to realize. It doesn't mean that it's always about sex or sexual addiction. Lust can be for power. Lust can be for manipulating other people. And it can involve a lot more than that, but it is doing something we know is wrong, or it's inappropriate, or it's indecent. And lust happens with others in person, but the mind is where that problem begins. And few of us haven't struggled with it at some time. The desert fathers and mothers were very well known to have struggled with it as well. It can be a way that we wind up dehumanizing and even exploiting others. And we can get addicted into these bad habits and patterns or compulsive behaviors. And it's important to know that it can be a common struggle, but it can also be resisted and overcome. And we should overcome something that tries to master us in such an insidious way. The wise desert elders knew that this distraction of lust and fornication, these temptations, and fornication is what is sexual activity that is forbidden to us. It keeps us from spiritual maturity and peace. They say that Alma Sarah was someone who said she was attacked greatly by the demon of fornication. For 15 years, she struggled mightily with it. And she never prayed to see it eased. In this war of lust and fornication, she only prayed, God, strengthen me. And eventually she overcame that. The Desert Father Evagrius wrote, of course, about lust, and there is a lot more in my book about that I would love for you to read. The chapter 2 is called There's Something About Mary, Lust to Purity, and that's what we move from. We move from lustfulness to purity. And Mary Egyptica was a desert mother that is featured in that chapter, and her story is basically outrageous. The stuff she got up to, the sexual promiscuity she got up to, is stunning, and she turned it all around. So lust, gluttony, and the 7 other afflicting thoughts, and how the desert mothers and fathers in the 300s and 400s dealt with them. They're the subject of my book that's coming up, and you can order it. I will be going over the 7 others soon on YouTube, and I hope that you tune in for that. If you subscribe to YouTube, you'll see more in this series. I'll